January 21st, 2026. I'd like to thank everyone for coming and want to acknowledge that we do have a few new PPFC members this year. And so I'm going to ask everyone who is on the PPFC to briefly introduce themselves, emphasis on briefly. Slight point of order for timekeeping. We do need to wrap this meeting up by 4:45 p.m. So I'm going to be sort of watching the clock very closely. So quick introduction from my end. Linda Hopkins. I am the representative for the 5th District for the County of Sonoma and for Sonoma Water. And I will hand it over to Janet.
Janet Pauley, Chair of the Mendocino County Inland Water and Power Commission.
Good afternoon, Tommy Williams. I work for the Army Corps in San Francisco. I'm here representing my boss, who's our Army officer. I'm her senior civilian.
Good afternoon, all. Joshua Fuller, NOAA Fisheries, representing Penny Rovellas. And I think most of you folks recall Bob Cooey and Lisa Van Anna used to sit in this chair as well. They're now retired, and so I'm here. Thank you.
And I do believe that we have at least one and maybe two members joining online. Madeline, are you there from Mendocino?
I am. Good afternoon, everyone. Madeline Klein, Mendocino County 1st District Supervisor.
Wonderful. And is Claudia online?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
This is Claudia Villacorta. I'm the Assistant Executive Officer, North Coast Water Board.
Wonderful. Thank you both so much for joining remotely.
And Chris Watt may
Oh,
join
wonderful.
us.
And we have one other. Chris, are you there?
Yeah, good afternoon. Chris Watt, Russian River Flood Control District.
Wonderful. Thank you for joining us today. With that, I'm going to provide a brief introduction and overview before I hand it over to David for some presentations. Believe it or not, it's been a while since we have convened. The PPFC last met in person in May of 2023. So we've been meeting nearly annually, that little asterisk, since 1998 to serve as a forum on the Federal Endangered Species Act consultation and implementation of the Russian River Biological Opinion, or as most of us call it, the BIOP. Today's meeting will cover a range of topics and provide some updates on the 2025 Russian River BIOP. We will have short updates on the new Russian River BIOP and key next steps in its implementation, including reservoir operations, estuary management, and dry creek habitat enhancement projects. Because this meeting has a lot to cover, I'm going to ask our panel members to hold their questions until after each presentation. There will also be an opportunity for the public to ask any questions or share any comments at the end of each presentation. So we'll start with a panel, and then we'll go to members of the public. And with that, I will go ahead and turn it over to David Manning, Sonoma Water Assistant General Manager of Environmental Resources, to introduce our first presentation.
Thank you, Director Hopkins, and thank you, National Marine Fisheries Service, Army Corps of Engineers, panel members from Mendocino County, for your patience. It has been a few years since we've held this meeting. We had anticipated receiving the biological opinion in 2024. The process took a bit longer than we all anticipated. We wanted to make sure when we came to you with this next meeting, we could discuss the successes from implementing the 2008 biological opinion and give you an indication of what's to come over the next 10 years with the implementation of the 2025 biological opinion. So we're going to step through a series of presentations. It's a bit of a workshop. Happy to answer questions. We're going to go through each major component of the biological opinion. Some of the presentations are a little bit technical. Happy to answer questions as they arise. And as soon as Jessica Martini-Lamb, who is the Division Manager for Environmental Resources at Sonoma Water, is ready, we will give you a brief overview of what we're going to talk about today and what's in that 2025 biological opinion. And then panels will be coming up with experts that are working on each component, and they'll describe their work.
So good afternoon. I'm Jessica Martini-Lamb with Sonoma Water. We are going to be presenting just a very high-level view of the 2025 Russian River Biological Opinion. As many of you know, Sonoma Water, the Army Corps of Engineers, and the Mendocino County Flood Control District were issued a biological opinion in 2008. That opinion had a term of 15 years and expired in September of 2023. Around 2021, the Army Corps and Sonoma Water re-engaged with National Marine Fisheries Service, and that consultation resulted in the 2025 Russian River Biological Opinion being issued by National Marine Fisheries Service on April 29th. They issued this biological opinion to the Corps, Sonoma Water, and the Mendocino District again. It has a 10-year term and covers the Sonoma Waters and Army Corps' operations and maintenance activities within the Russian River watershed, including flood control, water supply, channel maintenance, monitoring, and habitat restoration. And then the district's channel maintenance activities in the upper Russian River are also included. It is not advancing.
Use this. There,
Right here?
that worked.
Okay. Okay, you have the magic touch. Thank you. So the good news with the 2025 biological opinion is that National Marine Fisheries Service determined that the agency's proposed action is not likely to jeopardize the continued existence of coho salmon, Chinook salmon, Central California coast steelhead, southern resident killer whale, or adversely modify their designated critical habitat. And this is a significant change from the 2008 biological opinion, which was a jeopardy opinion. The 2025 biological opinion really reflects the improvements in operations that were learned and implemented over the course of the last biological opinion and the conservation measures that we included in the proposed action. NMFS did include some reasonable and prudent measures in the new BIOP to address potential for adverse impacts to salmonid species. And then they also included requirements for technical advisory groups, which you'll hear more about in the presentations today. So over the next few slides, I'll describe the proposed action that NMFS evaluated in the biological opinion. To start, the proposed action included reservoir, flood control, and water supply operations at both Coyote Valley Dam and Warm Springs Dam, including deviations to the water control manuals using forecast-informed reservoir operations, otherwise known as FIRO. NMFS supports implementation of FIRO and changing the Russian River Hydrologic Index by moving the index from the Eel River to the Russian River. And the proposed action also includes filing water rights petitions for a period of 7 to 10 years on a time-limited basis to modify the hydrologic index and base it on storage at Lake Mendocino. The biological opinion also evaluated the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers' short and long-term turbidity reduction strategies at Lake Mendocino and requires the Army Corps to conduct specific turbidity investigations, form a multi-agency technical advisory committee, and conduct water quality and fisheries monitoring in the upper Russian River. And then among the conservation measures that were included related to water supply and reservoir operations were the annual allocation of 2,500 acre-feet of stored water at Lake Sonoma that can be used for enhancing seasonal fish migration through the use of pulse flows and adaptively managing releases from Coyote Valley Dam for the benefit of out-migrating salmonids, as well as additional juvenile salmon and steelhead out-migration survival studies, both in the upper and lower Russian River. Many of the activities that are included in the proposed action that were evaluated are continuing operations from the last biological opinion, and that includes the Army Corps and Sonoma Waters habitat enhancement efforts on Dry Creek, including both adaptive management, completion of the remaining restoration, and long-term maintenance of projects that have been completed to date. It also includes a revised approach to estuary adaptive management, emphasizing improved water quality-based habitats optimization and habitat enhancement, including construction of between 3 and 5 acres that would target juvenile steelhead and coho rearing habitat. So broadly, some of the next steps under the biological opinion are the work of the technical advisory committees and work groups that you'll hear about more in the next presentations, as well as ongoing monitoring of salmon throughout the watershed, additional survival studies, and a reservoir operations work group, as well as ongoing estuary management and work in Dry Creek. So those will be all subjects of our next presentations. And I would just add that Sonoma Water is continuing our consultation under the California Endangered Species Act with the California Department of Fish and Wildlife for these same proposed actions related to coho salmon.
Thank you, Jessica. So you'll notice that there's a theme about reservoir management and improving stream flows for migrating salmonids. Don Seymour, Deputy Director of Engineering, who is our resident expert in all things hydrology and river engineering and management, is here today with us to help answer any questions about that component of biological opinion implementation. We're happy to take a few questions right now before moving into a set of presentations about Dry Creek.
Great. And with that, I will bring it back to the board. Is there anyone online who wishes to make any questions about this? And I apologize, I can't see any raised hands or you, so you'll just have to sort of jump in if you do have questions. Okay,
No questions.
Great. All right, with that, I will bring it back to the board in person. Any questions? All right, and do we have any questions or comments from members of the public on the first presentation? Seeing no one rise, sounds like we can move into Dry Creek.
Okay, so we're going to have a panel come up and join us, some colleagues. I'm going to slide over chairs, and I will introduce each of the folks that are come up and talk to us today. So I'm joined today. I will start us off with a bit of an overview. Tammy Church from the Army Corps of Engineers. Tammy, would you like to join us up here? Tammy is the Environmental Section Chief from the San Francisco District. I'm also joined by Neil Lassiter. Dr. Lassiter is a Principal Environmental Specialist with Sonoma Water, and Dr. Greg Horton, also a Principal Environmental Specialist, and David Cook, also a Principal Environmental Specialist. This is the team that's delivering the monitoring, the adaptive management, the planning for Dry Creek. And I will attempt to advance these slides by pushing on the magic spot on the keypad. I think I did it. All right. So I'll give you a brief background today. We'll talk about the monitoring and adaptive management, and then the project maintenance, the next steps for the project. Did I find the spot again? Once. It is sensitive. There we go. Okay. So the requirements from the 2008 biological opinion, as you may recall, included reducing the water velocity for coho salmon in the summer and winter by improving depth, cover, and habitat complexity over 6 of the 14 miles of Dry Creek over a 12-year period using an adaptive management approach. And we're going to hear all the details about that approach and how things have been going from our expert panel. This image, if you've been to these meetings in past years, might be familiar. When we first started this project, all of those areas, this is an image of Dry Creek, Lake Sonoma on the left-hand side, the confluence with the Russian River 14 miles downstream on the right. All the areas that you see shaded are where we implemented habitat improvements. In the early phases of the project, there are a variety of colors on this map indicating what we planned to construct in future years. Everything on this map that's in tan has already been constructed. The only portions of the stream where we have not done habitat enhancement work is in the very downstream end near the confluence of the Russian River. That's the phase 3 of the Army Corps' project. And when I finish my presentation, I'll turn it over to Tammy so she can talk a little bit about the next steps for that component of the project. So in the 2025 Russian River biological opinion, I won't read all of this text, but the conclusion is that this very large-scale effort has improved rearing conditions for fish by providing low water velocity and cover over slightly more than 4.5 miles of the stream. There's evidence that juvenile salmonids, steelhead, coho are using these habitat features. Dr. Horton will give us some evidence of that in his presentation. So in 2025, the biological opinion now requires a continued effort in Dry Creek, adaptive management, which means maintenance and learning from the projects that have been constructed, completion of a small-scale project that's a project to help continue to provide habitat while we plan for the additional mile of restoration work or an alternative project for that phase 3 of the Army Corps' obligation under the 2008 biological opinion. And long-term, the projects, whether they were constructed by Sonoma Water or the Army Corps of Engineers, are to be maintained by Sonoma Water. That is our commitment. So the current status, 24 habitat reaches have been built between 2012 and 2024. There are multiple sites. Dr. Lassiter is going to run us through all of those sites. The Army Corps is planning to address some sites that were constructed but require some additional work in Reach 10. That alternative last phase of the project will not be constructed in Dry Creek as originally planned. We'll find an alternative for that. And now we move in largely to this maintenance and monitoring phase, where we'll be looking at several sites we've maintained thus far, and then planning each year to address additional sites, and David Cook is going to describe our next steps there. So with that, before we dive into some of the other presentations, I'll turn it over to Tammy. Would you like to describe some of the next steps for the Army Corps of Engineers? Yep.
Thank you, Dave, and thank you to members of the committee and the public for allowing us to be here. I'm Tammy Church. I'm the Environmental Planning Section Chief for the Army Corps San Francisco District, and I'm just going to give a very brief summary of the USACE's construction efforts for the Dry Creek Habitat Enhancement Project to date and where we're going with this in the future. So we completed construction of our components in 2024. There were some features that experienced excessive sedimentation during the winter of 23-24. We did have the Army Corps' Committee for River Engineering, who are a panel of experts from across the Corps, come visit the sites, give us their recommendations, and that report was shared in 2025. 2025 was largely dedicated to construction closeout, development of the interim O&M manual, and then ultimate turnover of the sites to Sonoma Water. We did have additional sediment experts, including Peter Wilcox, who's a national expert in sediment transport and management, come out and look at the site and give us additional recommendations. So for the future, we are prepared and poised to comply with the terms of and conditions of the biological opinion. However, this project, as well as a bunch of other projects, are waiting for the president to sign our appropriations bill. We'll know more once we start implementing our 2026 work plan. But we are still working through this process with our partners at Sonoma Water, and we're very grateful for that partnership.
So, Chair Hoppus, we can take some initial run through some of the presentations and take questions as we step through that material.
I think continue.
Very good. Okay, so I'm trusting that I can continue to accurately run the presentation. Is there something I'm missing, Pamela? I think I'm hitting the same.
The cursor gets off the screen.
Got it.
So there, I think I got it back on there. Oh, it didn't? Oh, it just took a minute.
Okay.
It took a minute.
All right. Okay, Neil and Greg, I will step through the slides. Please direct me and take it away.
Hello, committee members. Pleasure to speak to you today. My name is Neil Lassiter. I'm a principal environmental specialist, and I'm going to talk about our Dry Creek Habitat Enhancement Project and some of the monitoring that we're doing. I'm going to talk about the physical monitoring, and my colleague Greg Horton will talk about the biological monitoring. Next. So what I'm going to show you here is a map, sort of a different version of what Dave just showed you. So the map has Lake Sonoma at the top and the Russian River at the bottom, and then Dry Creek snaking through the middle of this map here with different colored panels attached to the to Dry Creek. Those are our different functional reaches, and that's where we have implemented our project. And so starting in 2012, we've slowly implemented 1 or 2 projects a year. We didn't implement in 2015 or 2020, but added 1 to 3 reaches a year from 2012 all the way through 2024 up until last year. And as Dave mentioned, we now have 24 different habitat enhancement reaches along Dry Creek. That's a lot of habitat enhancement reaches. And so I'm going to describe the physical monitoring that we do and how we rate these, and then Greg will talk about the biological monitoring as I described before. So Also, just to orient yourself here, the map on the right has that same, there's a little skinny panel that shows you exactly where you are for this larger map. So we're in reach 13B, and you're looking at a reach that we implemented. And so next animation, Dave, sorry. Okay. So what you're looking at, so there's the Dry Creek main channel. And then if you click again, Dave, it'll show you a Dry Creek side channel that we constructed in 2023. So just to orient yourself on this map. And
I promise I'm not moving the cursor at all.
okay.
Just for the
What
record,
you'll
David,
see
you're doing great. You're doing great.
What you'll see is that there's the Dry Creek side channel. And so so when we monitor both side channels that we've built, alcoves that we built, and we also manage or monitor the main channel. And what we do is we use survey techniques to collect depth, velocity, and cover data, spatially referenced depth, velocity, and cover data within both the main channel and the side channel. So underneath those two arrows, you can see a bunch of points. So that's where we've collected all our spatially referenced depth and velocity data, about 2,000 points for this one reach. But then above the water, we use a drone. And you can see in the lower left panel, there's my colleague Eric McDermott flying a drone, which collects LiDAR data. And LiDAR will collect topographic data, also spatially referenced, but we can do it very efficiently. We don't need to use manual survey techniques. And that's about 40,000 points. So with this, we can get detailed maps of both the floodplain and what's going on underneath the stream. Next slide, Dave. And so with this, we are able to make detailed maps of depth, velocity, and cover, which will come up in a second here. But those three metrics are the primary metrics that were identified in the Dry Creek Adaptive Management Plan, which was specified in the 2008 biological opinion, which is how we monitor and rate each one of our reaches. So depth, velocity, and shelter, those are the basic things that we collect. And I'm going to show you on the next slide, just in a minute, how we, on the next slide, we rate each individual enhancement reach. So what's in each one of those boxes. But going from depth, velocity, and cover to the overall reach ratings, there's a lot that goes into that. We actually monitor and rate each feature, so each log feature, each habitat unit, riffle, pool, flat water, and then we rate each site, each individual site within one of these reaches. And by sites, I mean main channel versus side channel versus alcove. So we rate everything and then roll that up into a composite rating for each individual enhancement reach. And so I'll show you those ratings, but I want to show you a pattern that we've observed. So just to orient yourself again, there's Warm Springs Dam, there's Pena Creek comes in about 5 miles downstream, and Russian River down at the mouth of Dry Creek. And so the area upstream of Pena Creek, between the dam and Pena Creek, is kind of an upper segment. So we just get dam influence. There's very little sediment that comes into the river at that point. Below Pena Creek, we have both the dam influence, so releases from the dams, and tributary input from Pena Creek, bringing sediment and stream flow. So it's influenced sort of how these reaches will react. And then lower down, we've got all three influences. Influences from the dam, tributary input from not just Pena Creek, but other tributaries that come in between Pena Creek and the main stem. And then we also have a Russian River backwater that develops under higher flows, which causes sediment to drop out or deposit in these lower reaches. And so for our 24 reaches, next slide, Dave, we have 6 reaches that are upstream of the confluence of Pena Creek, but downstream of the dam. And what we see there is good to excellent ratings. Again, a lot goes into these ratings, but we see these are relatively stable reaches. We haven't had the need to maintain them. The habitat is well maintained. And so if you keep going downstream, so they're stable with occasional maintenance, we have 12 reaches in that middle segment. And so click again, Dave. Here we're getting good to fair, and fair means 1 or 2 sites are not performing as we intended, and likely need maintenance. So we're starting to see, and the main thing that we see, the main issue that we need to address is aggradation or sedimentation. And that sediment appears to be coming from Pena Creek. And then as we go farther downstream, so we'll need regular maintenance in those reaches. Farther downstream, with the backwater influence from the Russian River and the influence from Pena Creek, we are seeing things not performing as intended. And so these are reaches that need addressing, need maintenance. And again, it has to do with aggradation either in the alcove or in side channels. So if we look at this in a composite, click again, Dave. So if we look at this in a composite, we can see there's a pattern. So upstream from just downstream of the dam to Pena Creek, things look okay. As these tributary influences come in, water, sediment, then it is tougher to maintain these reaches without some maintenance. And as we get farther down toward the Russian River, and that backwater influence becomes very difficult. And so this is what we're going to use to drive our maintenance moving forward. We want those yellow and orange boxes to become green and dark green boxes. So, so that's the physical monitoring, and those are the results we have so far. And I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Greg Horton. He's going to talk about some of the biological monitoring. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Again, Greg Horton, Principal Environmental Specialist, and I oversee our fish monitoring in the Russian River watershed. In the case of Dry Creek, we're very interested in looking at whether or not these habitat enhancements are benefiting fish populations. So we think about the full life cycle of coho and steelhead and chinook. Next slide. And we do this by employing a variety of monitoring techniques, sort of focused around some metrics relevant to these life stages you see listed here: adults, juveniles, and then juvenile to smolt survival. Next slide, please. You've seen this map before. Neil just showed it. Next slide. Or next tap, yeah. And those are the 24 habitat enhancement reaches that Neil showed, but the white boxes are indicating those enhancement reaches that we've looked at, whether or not adults are using those reaches. Next slide. And the right-hand image is the same 24 enhancement reaches, only it's showing that 12 of those 17 enhancement reaches that we evaluated were used by adults. So next slide. That's pretty good evidence that fish are entering those habitat enhancement reaches, and we have evaluated that by direct observation, doing spawner surveys, as well as some electronic tagging that we've done that detect fish moving into these habitat enhancements. And then this is really the same setup, only for juveniles, those same 24 reaches, only in this case, we evaluated 21 of the 24 enhancement reaches for juvenile salmon and steelhead. And of those 21 reaches, all 21 do indeed have had juvenile salmon and steelhead using those reaches. Next slide. So, again, pretty good evidence, very good evidence that juveniles are using those reaches, and also that they're benefiting from those reaches. Actually, growth rates in those enhancement reaches is about 3 times higher than it is in other tributaries of the watershed elsewhere outside of the Dry Creek watershed, where we're measuring growth rates. Next slide. So then juvenile to smolt survival. Fish are using these habitat enhancement reaches in the summertime and late fall, but how well do they survive to the smolt stage is the question. So we place these release boxes in some of the habitat enhancement areas, place fish in those release boxes, let them acclimate for a few days, open the box. The acclimation is allowing them to sort of get used to their new environment. These are hatchery fish that have spent their life in the hatchery, so a very new environment. Next slide. And what we've done this in several habitat enhancement areas over the years, and we found actually, next slide, actually very good survival to the smolt stage. And again, similar or even higher than we're seeing in other tributaries of the Russian River watershed. Next slide, please, Dave. I think that's it for me. Yeah. So again, good evidence that fish are using those areas and benefiting from them.
Thank you, Greg. Mr. Cook.
Yeah, thanks, Greg. I'm Dave Cook, and I'll be talking about our maintenance of these enhancement sites moving forward. Dave? So the purpose of our Dry Creek Habitat Enhancement Maintenance Program is to maintain all of the constructed habitats that have been installed in the last 12 or so years. And those include all of the habitat features that Neil and Greg talked about, including side channels, alcoves, log structures, and riffles. And ultimately, what we want to do is maintain these structures to their original design, but also adaptively manage them with overall goals to optimize rearing habitat for salmon and steelhead. Dave? So how the whole maintenance kind of process will work is our physical monitoring and biological monitoring will really inform kind of the basis of where we possibly may need to do maintenance. But then every year we'll do an evaluation of the 24 reaches and kind of look at these sites, consider what sites may not be performing as we'd like them to. Then we will prioritize what sites we want to do maintenance work in the late spring. We'll coordinate with landowners for get on their sites. We'll prepare our work plan, and then the actual maintenance work or the construction work will be done in the summertime. So we'll be in this regular cycle of looking at sites, evaluating them, and determining if maintenance needs to be done. And the maintenance kind of needs are probably going to fluctuate largely on winter rain events. So I just want to give you an example of maintenance work we did just this last summer at Reach 8. This was a constructed side channel that was built in 2017. This is a 1,000-foot long channel that parallels the main stem of Dry Creek. And there are a number of large wood structures that were installed to provide cover habitat for juvenile salmonids. And then also the side channel provides slower moving water that is conducive for rearing salmonids. Watching this site over a number of years, we started to see sediment accumulate in the side channel. And then a couple of years ago, a large log became jammed in the inlet. So that's where the water flows into the side channel. And that really accelerated sedimentation of the inlet, which reduced water flow into the channel. And also it diverted water onto a bank that started to erode. Next slide. So here are some photographs of the kind of the maintenance site. So upper left is that large log that is literally at the inlet of the channel. So that gravel bar there is where there should be flowing water. And then where sediment had accumulated throughout the channel, we had a large excavator in there removing sediment. And then we had one spot where that log jam had caused some bank erosion, so we went and installed some rock to protect that bank. Next slide. So here are some before and after photographs. So on the left side is that inlet of the side channel. So that's where water is directed into the enhanced habitat. So before we had that large log and no water flowing through the channel. And then afterwards, we had reestablished flows going into the channel and provide that rearing habitat for juvenile fish. And then on the right side, that's photographs of the middle part of the side channel. There was an isolated pool, but there was no connection to the creek. We did a fish rescue there. We did relocate over 100 salmonids. And then after that, we're able to reconnect the side channel to Dry Creek and provide a lot more aquatic habitat for juvenile fish. And this is the last shot. So this was some of our kind of post-maintenance monitoring. This photograph is looking at the inlet of the side channel. It's working great. We've got water flowing through there, providing rearing habitat for fish. And then on the right side, this photograph was taken probably in November, maybe early December. And Chinook salmon, this is the period where Chinook salmon come up and spawn in Dry Creek. And we actually were able to document that adult female Chinook came up and dug a red, which is a nest with her eggs in it, right at the entrance to the inlet. So hopefully those eggs will hatch and those young fish will move into the side channel and be able to rear there and have have high growth rates and a higher chance of survival. Oh, one more slide, forgot about this one. So we are already discussing the needs for maintenance for 2026. We've tentatively identified 3 reaches, reach 4, 5, and 10. And we will kind of ground truth kind of the maintenance needs after the winter flood events have occurred. And we're looking at probably doing some vegetation management, primarily just trimming trees so equipment can get it on site, doing sediment removal. And if there are isolated pools where we're going to do sediment removal, we'll do a fish rescue.
Thank you, Dave. Chair Hopkins, I think that concludes our several presentations of what's happening in Dry Creek.
Thank you so much. And the pictures were so wonderful. And it seems so amazing that the timing, right, of concluding that, and then you see the red going in and the work really paying off in the utilization by the fish. So that's wonderful. I would bring it back. We'll start with first in person. Any questions? Yeah,
I've got one.
go for it.
Yeah. So I think you have to recognize that this is coming from someone who works for the Army Corps. So take it with whatever grain of salt you want. I'm curious, a lot of talk about maintenance, and it seems like you have a very good handle on that. Is there any constraint other than person hours and funding, but is there any other constraint that you guys see as hampering your ability to maintain a successful set of infrastructure and habitat enhancements that you'd like to throw out for the group, or do you feel like you have a pretty good handle on it?
Overall, I think we have a good handle on it. Probably one other thing I didn't mention is we are restricted to maintenance of structures that we installed, and we have already landowner access agreements of those sites. So that is one limitation, is we can't go somewhere else and do maintenance that's outside of our scope.
We're also seeking programmatic permits to be able to do this work more efficiently each year. You want to mention that, David?
Yeah, so we're in the process of getting programmatic permits from the Corps, Regional Water Quality Control Board, California Department of Fish and Wildlife, and also getting coverage for federal and state endangered species acts. And these programmatic permits will basically allow us to do this maintenance work as with a kind of a template of what we can do, kind of like we'll have a toolkit of sediment removal, bank repair, vegetation management. And basically every year we'll prepare a work plan, send those to the resource agencies to review. And then with our kind of toolkit, we'll say, hey, these are kind of like the tasks we're going to do and the methods we're going to implement to execute the maintenance work.
I'll just ask really quickly, do you see areas between your sites that you've been working on where you consider there are problems that need to be addressed?
Can I punt that to Neil? Would you want to respond to that? Because he's done a lot of physical monitoring.
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Do you see, he mentioned that there's areas where you don't have access. Do you see problems in those areas that you believe should be addressed now that you've had this much time to work on this?
Well, I will say we focus most of our time in those 24 reaches. So we don't do any of monitoring outside of those 24 reaches. But we do see, I mean, there is still natural processes occurring within Dry Creek. There have been instances of bank erosion, but if they're not related to or associated with our project, then we don't address those as part of our maintenance.
Good questions.
Great, excellent work. It's exciting to see how far Dry Creek has come. Dave, you had a bullet there on prioritizing the maintenance. Is there a criteria for that? How do you score that? Is that a conversation with us in the department?
Yeah, we want to develop some triggers, but and the nice thing is Sonoma Water has a stream maintenance program, which has been implemented for decades. It's primarily urban streams, but they have that kind of structure of setting up triggers that will inform, really what maintenance work needs to be done. But really largely the physical monitoring and the biological monitoring is, a huge asset for us to help prioritize what maintenance activities need to be implemented.
That's good to hear. Just to follow up on that, in terms of the rating scheme, Neil, you had it's excellent, good, fair, poor. Are you seeing a correlation with the densities of coho salmon? Is that tracking excellent habitat being higher density, or maybe Greg?
Yeah, we have seen an uptick in the natural origin coho that are occurring in these side channels. In terms of density, these dry creek habitat enhancements are intentionally deep. They're not intentionally difficult to sample, but that makes them difficult to sample. So in terms of getting any sort of quantitative, precise estimates of density, that's a challenge in Dry Creek.
But for the features that are performing at the excellent standard, I think I saw, are they typically having, generally speaking, higher densities than?
Yeah, we have been able to get some density estimates in some places, and we do tend to see spawning in the places where when I look at it with my eye, I say, wow, that's some pretty juicy spawning habitat. And indeed, we do see fish spawning in those places. So it is sort of lining up with expectations, I believe.
Ratings. Excellent. Thank you.
And do we have any questions from our online committee members, Claudia, Madeline, or Chris?
No questions.
All right.
No,
Thank
but
you.
Thank you.
And anyone from the public wish to comment or ask questions about this particular item? Seeing none, I think we are on to turbidity. Is that? Oh, wait, go, come on up. So if you could speak into the microphone right up here. Sorry, I forget that you all aren't used to attending Board of Supervisors meetings every Tuesday. Most times people immediately step up and they start walking towards the podium. My apologies. And actually, you know what, so you don't have to have a chiropractic adjustment after you make this comment. You can raise that thing so you don't have to lean over. It should rise so you don't have to lean. No, it's the Is it still there? No,
Is it on?
Come up. There you are.
Yeah, I just have a question about the rearing area, all the 25 sites. Is the idea to it's probably twofold. The way I understand it is for the adults to actually come up and spawn there and not go all the way to the hatchery. Is that the idea of developing this? And I was very well understand the fact that it's good for the smolt and the juveniles to summer over there.
Yeah, I mean, I think we like to work ourselves out of the hatchery business eventually. That may take a really long time. But the more fish we see spawning in the wild, the closer we get to that.
Right.
Again, it's going to take a long, long time. But it's really, that is what we want to see happen. We want to see fish spawning in the wild for sure.
So did I understand that some of the plants were actually coming from the hatchery that you released in that area? So is there any problem with having the genetics of the hatchery fish all of a sudden now spawning in Dry Creek. They have been spawning in Dry Creek since the hatchery's been there. We all know that. And so now you have these unclipped fish that appear to be wild that really are not all wild. But, you know, the genetics are hatchery. Because I'm a fisherman, obviously.
Yeah.
And so I have to pass on some of the information I understand here today to other fishermen and try to, we're all for what you're doing, by the way.
Sure. Okay.
And I just wondered if there's any genetic questions going on.
So a couple thoughts on that. So we and others, our agency partners, call them natural origin fish. And that's in recognition of the fact that these fish, many of them do have parentage that comes from the hatchery. So that's part of the answer to that question. The other part is that the hatchery, it's a very carefully managed, genetically managed program. They take great pains to cross fish with fish that are distantly related. So the idea is that then you maximize genetic diversity. So the genetic diversity that's there is maximized if you mate distantly related, so no relation ideally, with one another. So their offspring would have, you know, the maximum amount of genetic diversity available.
Okay. One other question, I don't know if this would, on what you're responsible for, but has there been any thought of getting some of the native steelhead out of the lake itself and transform them down to your area and get those fish, which you'd have wild genetics then coming back to the lower, you know, Dry Creek where they should be. I don't know if that's what your involved is or.
Well, it's more a question for our agency partners, the National Marine Fisheries Service,
Right.
the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, those, and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. Those are the folks that are really, you know, raising the fish and then making the decisions on where those fish are released.
Thank you. Thank you for your time.
You're welcome.
Thanks for your questions. Do you want to lean in on the nymph side?
Sure. Thanks, George, for that question. In terms of some of the, I guess, the resident steelhead or landlocked steelhead and the reservoirs, particularly Lake Sonoma, you know, it's actually some of the thought has been the opposite way. As you probably know, with the hatchery genetic management plan, we are trying to maximize diversity and bringing in more natural origin steelhead to strengthen the hatchery production and those fish that come out of that facility. There are a lot of surplus hatchery, and so we've had some dialogue about actually putting steelhead in the reservoirs. No success there. There's a whole host of issues with disease and water quality issues and things like that. But the HGMP for steelhead definitely is looking into getting more natural origin fish into the hatchery and propagating those fish with the hatchery origin fish. We had a lot of success last year. We had over 120 NORs come back to the hatchery, which was a high for us in many, many years. So that process continues. The results are still TBD. But I think we were saying, yeah, we're all looking for strengthening diversity of our fish, stronger stock, and hopefully that results in more productivity and higher return rates.
Any other comments or questions from members of the public? Seeing none, I think we can move on to Turbidity. I also wanted to say thank you, Janet, because I often think about, you know, we have these great examples, and then to what extent do we have Bermuda triangles for the fish, right, in between, you know, these beautifully maintained habitat areas. I know of a few Bermuda triangles in the lower Russian River for sure, so, but appreciate that. So over to you, David.
Thank you, Chair Hopkins. I'd like to call up, thank you, panel members, colleagues. It's a tremendous amount of work, and there's a staff behind each person that was here presenting to you today. I just want to acknowledge that staff. It is literally dozens of people that collect those data in the field and do all that hard work. So they're not here today. I hope they're listening in. They're much appreciated. So Nick Malasavage, would you like to come on up? And I will let you drive, sir. Just the down button. The down button. Down.
And I just want to say that I'm super excited to see Nick when the river is not flooding and we're not in crisis mode. So it's lovely. The sun is shining and we're not in imminent flood mode.
Light on 5. Gotcha.
As a colleague of Nick, we agree.
Thank you, Supervisor Hopkins. I feel like I'm a corner of a Bermuda Triangle down in the lower river as well. Thanks for the introduction. I was very nervous about speaking today, and then I was really nervous for Dave operating the slide, so I'm terrified right now. Going to be quick and brief. Turbidity monitoring is a big part of the current biological opinion. Turbidity, its nature, its impacts known, and its potential impacts were a big part of the previous biop. So I'm going to kind of crash through some things because although there's a number of commitments and expectations listed in the biop in numerical order, some of them are happening parallel. Some of them had a shotgun out immediately. One of the very first is just redeploying turbidity monitoring at locations that we had looked at before, as well as ironically not listed here, focusing on what's going on in the lake profile at Lake Mendo. Just some specific experts, focusing on trying to develop flow turbidity curves, suspended sediment curves, other appropriate rating curves. How does our operations at the lake correlate or not? This was a very intractable thing in the previous biop, and it's proving difficult. But we are, I think, much better poised to attack some of this stuff. Generically increasing turbidity dynamics or increasing the understanding of it, including organic and inorganic material. So we measure turbidity. Basically, it's a refraction. It's a light. How well can something see in the water? And there's lots of things that can distort that picture. We're going to get at that with time. The other big thing, we actually formed and had our first technical advisory committee meeting about 5 weeks before the issuance of the biop, just to kind of underscore how important we all held this issue. Not going to read the text other than to kind of point out we did want to ask the obvious questions as well as the complex questions. So point number 2, are we really looking in the right spot? Yeah, we acknowledge that we are repeating a lot of what we did in the past, and in the past we struggled to get a clear picture. But are we doing the right thing? March 17th, 2025, our TAC said, yeah, if you're trying to set yourself up to understand the baseline and what's going on at the facilities, you're good. Later on in the summertime, we really started to focus on determine the sources of turbidity. And that really is some of the most interesting, I think, science and engineering discussions. It's a bit of a mystery novel, a very boring one too, but a fun one for a bunch of nerds to try to get at, focusing on where is it coming from. One of the other things is not only we're measuring turbidity, but measure what is going on in the lake. So we have a few surveys of the reservoir over time to understand sedimentation. And the last one was in 2010 from the previous biop. In this biop, we also have a commitment in the first 2 years to get I'm shooting for a 2026, but we need one by 2027. Just calling attention to a little bit of the data here, particularly it's, the survey in 85, right after the power plant was ended. There was, a decent amount of sedimentation. Then in 94 and 2010, see another increase. And pretty much the sediment pool, which is just a little bit less than the number up here, it's consumed. The lake has kind of trapped what it was expected to trap. And in one way or another, we now have sediment and other things that move through the system and out the bottom of the lake. So just offering, we're seeing a lot of things. We got data flowing in. Sometimes it's obvious, sometimes it's curious, sometimes it's confounding, but some bulk interpretation. Since one of our initial actions is to try to understand like ramping rates. Is there a way that when we do a flood control release, when we ramp up, does that have an effect? Well, just
the basic takeaways is, what happens after it rains really hard. If y'all remember the fall of 24, we got like a foot of rain here in Santa Rosa. We almost got a foot up in Ukiah. The lakes were rather low. The burst of turbidity was very measurable with no changes in gates, just that natural big old flow into the reservoir, a big burp at turbidity. What happens after intense precipitation? Things taper down very quickly at Lake Sonoma. They kind of stabilize, hang high, and then taper over the course of weeks at Lake Mendocino. These are things we've seen before. And then what happens during flood control releases at Lake Mendo? Nothing, because the turbidity is already high. Again, these are just snapshots of what's going to be years of looking at this. And then just a little bit curious, but a fact, actually, when we have a flood control release at Lake Sonoma, the turbidity goes up. It doesn't go up big, but measurably, and that has to do with the plumbing at Lake Sonoma. So I guess the last point too is flood control releases at both lakes down because of forecast informed reservoir ops. So we're hanging on to more water. We see blue skies, kind of like where we're living right now. We're hanging the pool high. We got great weather. I hope everybody's enjoying it. We are. And the reality is we're just releasing less volume for flood control releases. We're doing that less frequently and less intensely because we can now look at this picture of what's going to happen in the future rather than aggressively racing back to that top of conservation. So just kind of these questions. We have opportunities, our gate operations contributing. So I have that bulk observation that I just shared that seems like no. That doesn't mean we're going to quit looking and dispense with this. It's important to continue watching this and also understand relative to pre-FIRO, now with FIRO, are there positive impacts? Because we believe there are just by fewer flood control releases. Can we correlate that ramping? We've had a lot of focus on the ramp down and stranding, but when we have the opportunity, can we watch the ramp up and understand if decisions on that level? That's one of our short-term actions we're taking, is trying to understand that. What can we do to help? The facility is what it is. It's got a physical configuration that is what we're living with. So some of the curious ideas that are in the biop is that in the late spring and summertime, the imprinting facility that normally has steelhead in it in the winter doesn't have anything. It's got these detention ponds that capture fish stuff and sediment. Is there an opportunity to take existing infrastructure, get creative, and have an impact in the relative near term? So can we help? The other part of that equation is where is this offending sediment and what is it? So really, I noted this kind of on the first slide, really driving to get at where is it coming from, what is it, and honestly, when is it? We talk about things at the TAC about what goes on in the lake during the late summer, oxygen levels, just the visual, the experiences and measuring things. It's not all suspended sediment. We know that much. So how do we start to chop into that and understand how it all comes together? And the last piece, which I don't have a slide, is folks a lot today talking about what's in the water, but didn't mention fish. Another aspect is the other side of the equation here, the other side of the algebra is even if we figure out all of this, we still have to have some plan to say, well what of it? And finding a way to pilot and have a functional program to monitor in the upper river to see what the effect and is on fish. That's on the to-do list. But this is our short term, in this calendar year, what are we getting at quickly, as fast as possible to not waste time and get at understanding a number of things about turbidity. That's it.
Wonderful. Is there anyone online, Claudia, Madeline, or Chris, who wanted to kick it off with any questions?
Yeah, this is Claudia. I have a quick question. You mentioned in the turbidity presentation that Lake Sonoma was having generally speaking, after following an intense rain event, you have tapering in the weeks following the event. And I'm wondering how far down the stream it's also what the travel distance of the sediment of the plume. Do you have any information on that?
No, I don't. From an NTU perspective, it'll jump from 8 NTUs to 15 and then go back to 8. I did want to bring it up that from a numerical perspective, that is the behavior. But the way it tapers and disappears is pretty quick in the weeks after, just like it kind of is in the watershed. The other contributions of natural turbidity, I'm just kind of winging it here, though, is that there is those tributaries that start to contribute not all too far downstream of the lake itself. So peeling that apart, haven't done any work to figure that out. But we have, I think the big takeaway is we're kind of confirming that the dynamics at Lake Sonoma are just good by comparison to Lake Mendocino. But it's one of those things where we still want to capture that data to understand if it changes and confirm it's stable. It's, for lack of a better word, I'm a geotech, but healthy turbidity, if there is such a thing. So sorry, I'm talking around your question instead of answering it because I don't actually have numbers to answer your question.
Okay, I think I appreciate that.
Any other online questions, Madeline or Chris?
Hi, this is Chris. Thanks for the presentation. Is there a plan or has there been any work done to look at the provenance of the suspended sediment coming into Lake Mendocino associated with the storm events?
Yeah, we have some leads, not enough to put on a slide, but we've actually at the TAC meeting, some of our experts have pointed to other experts at the USGS that have done a lot of this type of work up in, I think, Washington, possibly Oregon as well, doing exactly what you described. So it's sort of on the front end and the back end to understand, the origin story as it comes into the lake, because we have a lot focused on what's coming out after it's all combined. But yeah, those are some next steps to figure out the family tree of sources.
Thank you.
All right, any questions in person? Janet?
Yeah. Hi, Nick.
Yeah.
I bet you're nervous about what I might ask. Our new feasibility study for changing the operation of Lake Mendocino moving into the future has been paused, as you are aware. I'm wondering if you have any thoughts at all about that process once it is unpaused, and how much of the investigation might be involved with looking at this particular issue with the way Lake Mendocino has been operated and might be differently operated in the future.
Yeah, and I think I could actually answer that just because within the biological opinion, we're trying to pass on that knowledge to that study. Even though our current O&M dollars and my organization's existence, we can't change anything about the configuration. We can't build things, but we can certainly identify what we're seeing and what we know. And I would also say a lot of the great nerdy water quality data that Sonoma Water collects and shares, just how the lake profile changes over the years with sweet spots of cold enough, clear enough, that I think we know enough about the pool that reasonably we can say, okay, well then what about the plumbing would best meet that reality that happens inside the lake?
Good, thank you.
Other questions?
Just to comment, I just want to acknowledge the good work that your team is doing, Nick. Probably the most challenging part of finishing the 2025 BIOP was the turbidity component and what to do, and given what we're given in life here with this dam and how do we deal with it, but to really going after some of these hard questions. I think there's been a number of reports in the past and historical information, but trying to get through that and then actually trying to figure out what solutions may be. So far, I've been very pleased with the TAC. The conversations have been outstanding. I'm hopeful that we get some good solutions, and then how we actually make those a reality. That's going to be a test, but good work so far. Much appreciated.
Thanks so much.
Thank you so much for the excellent presentation. Really appreciate the partnership and the information, and look forward to hearing more. Hopefully we make this an annual thing and we'll see you next year, same time-ish, same place-ish. I will also just refrain from making any comments about the turbidity of the lower Russian River over the past couple of weeks. And I think that brings us on to the Reservoir Operations Working Group. You're not sticking around for that one?
Good afternoon.
I apologize. I forgot to ask. Any members of the public have any questions for Nick now that he has settled comfortably back into his chair? All right. Seeing no one rise. There we go.
All right. Good afternoon. Thanks for having me here today. My name's Chris Delaney. I'm a principal engineer at Sonoma Water, and I'm going to briefly describe this reservoir operations work group that we've convened as part of the biological opinion. There we go. A requirement of the biological opinion was to support adaptive management of reservoir releases for the migration of salmonids throughout the Russian River. So this applies to both reservoirs. I'll cover Lake Mendocino first. We're calling this strategy a pulse release strategy. So essentially what we're doing is we would be increasing the minimum in-stream flow requirements in the upper Russian River to support the passage of fish. So the upper Russian River extends from Coyote Valley Dam down to the confluence of Dry Creek. And this would only occur under dry water supply conditions. So there are 3 water supply conditions for the Russian River system that are defined in our water rights. And what we found in our analysis, well, I should step back. So those water supply conditions are used to set the minimum in-stream flow requirements for the Russian River defined in our water rights. But what we found in our analysis is that under normal water supply conditions, flows are already high enough to support passage of fish. So we didn't need to have these adaptive management measures during normal conditions. We also looked at critical conditions, and under critical conditions, which are really rare, there isn't enough water supply in the reservoir to support this adaptive management. So we're only focusing on dry water supply conditions. And we're also looking at 2 different timeframes in the year. So fall, which is October through December, and then winter and spring, which is February 15th through June 1. So basically, we can have 1 pulse release per year that can occur up to 14 days. And for Lake Sonoma, it's much simpler. We call this a block water release because it just establishes a total volume of water that can be released from the reservoir in a given year, which is 2,500 acre feet. And it doesn't have the same constraints as the Lake Mendocino pulse release. Lake Sonoma is much larger, more than double the capacity of Lake Mendocino. So there aren't those water supply concerns that we have with Lake Mendocino. So so it can occur under any water supply condition and at any time of year. However, I think we would expect it would typically align with the same time frames that we have for the pulse release, so fall, winter, and spring. This work group is being led by Sonoma Water. So I like the acronym there. It's the ROW, Russian River Reservoir Operations Work Group. So there's multiple agencies that are participating. So we have National Marine Fisheries, U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, California Department of Fish and Wildlife, State Water Resource Control Board, the Regional Water Quality Control Board, and the Russian River Flood Control District. So the main role of this work group is to provide guidance on the implementation of pulse releases and block water releases from the reservoirs. And as well as to support this process, Sonoma Water is providing forecasts for different locations in the Russian River on a weekly basis. I'll have more on this later in the presentation. And then another role of this work group is to assist in the development of this reservoir operations plan. We're actually working to have a draft plan developed by this spring as required under the biological opinion. And our progress to date is we had a kickoff meeting this past September, really just to get the work group assembled. But then we actually had our first implementation meeting this past December. We were looking at potentially very dry conditions in December, and we were potentially considering we might actually have some sort of adaptive management implementation in January. I'm sure you all recall the latter half of December was quite wet, so there wasn't a need for that. But it's been dry for a number of weeks, so moving ahead, if it stays dry, we could be implementing either pulse releases or block water releases from the reservoirs this coming spring. So here's a figure showing the timeline for pulse releases for Lake Mendocino. And it also shows how those different management periods align with the life stages for salmonids in the Russian River. So the fall period, the upstream migration aligns with the Chinook's spawning period from October through December. And then the downstream migration period, February 15th to June 1, aligns with that smolt downstream migration that you can see there in the figure. So essentially, we would focus our adaptive management efforts really within these management periods. But also, you see in that figure, we also have check-ins during the non-management period, where we'll have periodic meetings, likely one at the end of a management season to discuss and learn from the previous season, and then a meeting going into the next season to help us prepare for the upcoming season. So here is the communication protocol that we've developed, a draft so far. This is still being refined. I'm not going to go into detail on this, but just want to point out that on the left-hand side, we have our upstream migration, and then the right-hand side is our downstream migration. And next, and listed below that are conditions that would basically trigger a process by which the work group might communicate and develop an adaptive management release, so a pulse release. So for the upstream migration, that would be an open estuary, dry water supply conditions, fish actually spawning and moving within the Russian River, and then forecasted low flows. And then for downstream migration, those conditions it's much simpler. It would basically be dry water supply conditions and then forecasted low flows. So if those conditions are met, we basically, that triggers us, the work group working together in order to develop a pulse release. So forecasting is a really important part of this work group. So Sonoma Water has been working with the Corps for years for the Forecast Inform Reservoir Operations Program. So we'll actually be using that same modeling framework to support forecasting for this work group. So we'll be using ensemble flow forecasts from the California Nevada River Forecast Center, which is part of the National Weather Service. And those forecasts basically have a 30-day lead time. So we'll be taking those forecasts, processing them through a model in order to generate forecasts for different locations throughout the Russian River. And then those forecasts will then be distributed to the work group on a weekly basis. And we're currently doing this now. We are implementing and sending out those forecasts. So the locations where we'll be providing forecasts are Lake Mendocino and Lake Sonoma, and then multiple locations in the Russian River. And ultimately, results will be posted as well on a website that we're currently developing. It's still under development, so in the interim, we're basically emailing these forecasts to the work group on a weekly basis. So here is an example forecast. There's a lot to unpack here, so I'm just going to quickly summarize it. So this is for Healdsburg. This was actually sent out to the work group this past December, so December 15th, the date there at the top. So the black line shows observed conditions, and then you see that sort of spaghetti of lines to the right side. That is the ensemble forecast. So those are basically 44 different forecasts that we're putting together using the forecasts from the CNRFC, and they're designed to account for forecast uncertainty. And what we have found through our experience with FURO is, accounting for forecast and for uncertainty is really helpful for informing reservoir operations. So we're attempting to apply that here with this work group. So here is a storage forecast also issued this past December. This is for Lake Mendocino. And once again, the black line shows observed conditions, and then to the right is the ensemble of forecasted conditions, once again designed to account for forecast uncertainty. But the main point I want to make here is it's important that we are forecasting both storage levels in the reservoir and downstream conditions. I mean, this program is designed to support the migration of salmonids in the Russian River. So you would think you would only need to forecast flows, but really there's a balance, right? So if we are making releases to accommodate migration, we're going to have to increase releases, and there's feedback. So that's going to have potential impacts to storage in the reservoir and impacts to water supply. So we really want to balance those two and make sure that we're generating, adaptive strategies that meet both objectives, both preserving storage for water supply and maintaining those flows for passage. So I'll just close it off with next steps. So, we're continuing to collaborate with the work group and moving forward to refine the program. We're also issuing weekly forecasts to our work group, and we're also developing our reservoir operations plan, which will have a draft developed by the spring. So thanks for your time, and if there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Thank you very much. We'll shake it up a little bit and see if any members of the public wish to ask questions on this one first. Anyone? Going once, going twice. All right. Anyone online? Claudia, Madeline, or Chris?
No questions.
All right. Not seeing any hands raised. I'll bring it back to those of us in person. Anyone want to lean in?
Got one.
Yeah.
Just curious who the decision authority is with all of the information that's getting sent out. I do love that you admitted that it's just via email, because that's what we always default to, right?
Yeah.
But when it goes out, to whom is it intended to sort of be picked apart, and then how is a decision made about what to release, when to release, how to release?
We haven't really implemented yet, so I think some of that will evolve moving forward. But ultimately, it is the work group that is going to collectively work together to develop these implementation strategies. So I don't know, maybe Josh, you want to comment there, but I mean, that is truly the intent, and that's how it's really described in the biological opinion.
Yeah, this is true. The intent is for the working group to get agreement and work on the timing and the adequacy of getting the flows right for fisheries migration without really jeopardizing any of the water supply issues that we face, particularly in drought years. But as per the BIOP, if the working group cannot agree, there's some language about the discretion falling to NIMS and likely the department, but heavily on NIMS. at that point.
Thanks.
Other questions, Janet?
Not a question. I just want to thank you, Chris, and all the people that have been involved with FIRO for these past years. It's been a remarkable effort. It's really proving to be extremely valuable. And this kind of information moving forward is going to make it more and more useful as a tool. It's incredible. Thank you.
Thanks. We couldn't have done it without the core.
Yep,
So.
all of you.
And I just want to add my gratitude, which is I feel like over the years, we have just established really wonderful working relationships. And to see that institutionalized and memorialized, so that it will carry beyond us having everybody on speed dial and knowing how to do this, I think that that's really one of the beautiful things that is coming out of this. So I'm very grateful. And I will have to now add another acronym to the different working groups that are affiliated with the Russian River, of which I feel like we should have a whole board of, or a cheat sheet. So thank you very much. Really, really appreciate the presentation and more importantly, the work. So with that, I think we are going to move on to the estuary management project.
That's a new one for me too.
Yeah, I feel like I haven't gotten to be, at a meeting with you talking about seals in a little while. Pinnipeds, right? We would always do the pinniped count meetings out at the Monterey Community Center. So.
Yes. Well, regarding pinniped monitoring, if anyone is interested in joining our volunteer group, we are hosting, along with the Stewards of Coast and the Redwoods, on February 10th, a Zoom training for new volunteers. It's on the Stewards at the Coast and Redwoods website. We have a great group of citizen scientists that are working along with Sonoma Water's team of biologists studying the pinnipeds at the river mouth. So people are welcome to join that great group of people.
That's awesome. We will try to get that information out in our newsletter too. That's great.
I will send it to your office.
Perfect. Thanks.
So thank you again, Jessica Martini Lamb. And with me is Neil Laster. We're going to share some updates on the Russian River Estuary Management Project. And I'll start with a summary. Oftentimes people wonder what an estuary is. And basically the estuary is sort of a dynamic place where the river is meeting the sea. In the case of the Russian River estuary, the tidal extent of the estuary is from the river mouth at the Pacific Ocean upstream approximately 7 river miles near the confluence of Austin Creek, just upstream of the community of Duncan's Mills. And periodically, the river mouth will close. It creates a barrier beach, and the estuary then becomes a lagoon. And that lagoon can basically double the extent of the habitat that we're concerned about from that 7 river miles, approximately 13 river miles. It'll backwater all the way up to Vacation Beach. And the estuary management program, Sonoma Water became involved in this in the mid-1990s. Managing the estuary and closures has many, many, many decades history. But since salmon were listed in the Russian River watershed and the issuance of the last biological opinion, our management has really focused on having dual objectives. When the river mouth closes, responding to minimize the flood risk that low-lying properties face as water levels rise behind that barrier beach, as well as trying to enhance habitat conditions for salmon in the estuary. And the Russian River estuary, we have some really great aerial photos here. On the left is looking downstream from Duncan's Mills out towards Freeze-Out Creek. And you can see that in this part of the estuary, it's really highly defined by the topography here. It's basically a drowned river valley. So when the water backs up here, it's very confined and results in that extensive backing up into the lagoon. And then as you move downstream through the estuary, it meanders through this drowned river canyon and opens up near the Highway 1 bridge near Bridgehaven. And that's sort of the widest extent of the estuary, where this is the part of the estuary where we see more shoreline flooding as water levels increase and deepen. And I mention this because Neil's going to talk a little bit about habitat enhancement in this presentation and some of the targets that we have for thinking about habitat enhancement, trying to take advantage of some of this landscape in our planning. So Sonoma Water's beach management activities are a result of when the river mouth closes. So you'll see on the top right, the barrier beach that forms when ocean waves move sediment that's in offshore bars back onto the beach and closes the river inlet. And this can occur any time of the year, but predominantly we see it in the late spring and then again in the fall and in the winter months. And when that happens, one of the ways that we may respond is using a piece of equipment to create an artificial breach. Under the last biological opinion, we were really targeting trying to optimize lagoon conditions during the summer months using an artificial approach of creating an outlet channel. With this new biological opinion, we're sort of moving back to artificial breaching and more adaptive management to address these activities. And the flood risk that we see when the barrier beach forms and the estuary closes is really dynamic in the sort of drier part of the season. So see in the summer and then the fall, when a closure occurs, it could be an extended period of time before water levels rise to potential flood stage. So our target flood stage is to try to manage water levels at or below 9 feet. The Highway 1 sort of low spot in Jenner near the gas station and the post office is at about 12.3 feet. So in the top right photo, you'll see the post office in Jenner surrounded by water, and this is about 12-foot elevation. And one of the reasons why we spend so much time talking about the estuary, the main reason why, besides flood risk, is the benefits that the estuary habitats provide for salmon and steelhead. On the left here, you'll see juvenile salmon that were captured by our staff early in the summer months when steelhead are, primarily steelhead, are rearing in the estuary. And then you'll see on the right photos of salmon that have been recaptured later in the rearing season. And we see tremendous growth of these fish in the estuary, up to approximately a millimeter a day. And it's because of the tremendous food sources and conditions for steelhead in the estuary. So we're really looking at trying to meet both of these dual objectives. And our revised estuary adaptive management plan that we proposed to NIMS and the Department of Fish and Wildlife in the biological assessment and adopted in the biological opinion, we continue to try to manage this flood risk following river mouth closures, but really rather than trying to establish a specific target water elevation, we're really looking at trying to emphasize improving habitat based on water quality and how the water quality in the estuary related to temperature, dissolved oxygen, and salinity, how they all sort of combine to create optimal habitat for rearing in the estuary, really trying to target those conditions based on the conditions at the time of closure and which life stage of salmon and which species of salmon are utilized in the estuary at that time. And in order for us to do that, we are looking at, as you might imagine, an estuary is a pretty dynamic place. Tides are changing throughout the day. And when the estuary closes, there's a continued dynamic system where we're seeing changes in river flows flowing into the closed lagoon, oftentimes rain, waves overwashing the beach and adding significant water and salinity into the estuary that really drive the rate of rise in the estuary, but really also drive the conditions that salmon are facing when the estuary is closed. And as part of our adaptive management over the last biological opinion, we really learned a lot about thinking about how all of these conditions sort of work together to create the habitat that salmon face in the estuary. And under this new adaptive management approach, as I mentioned before, we're moving away from that sort of summer lagoon focus to looking at conditions for the specific life stages and species of salmon that are occurring at that time of the closure. So thinking about juvenile steelhead that are entering the estuary as young of the year in the late spring, they tend to be more freshwater adapted. They're not highly adapted to salinity yet. But as they rear in the estuary over the summer months, they become more saline adapted. And so the conditions in the fall may be better for them as juveniles, but then we're thinking about those Chinook that want to return to the river in the fall and what those conditions they will face if an estuary closure is then breached. So based on that timing and those species life stages, we will be making our informed decisions with our work group on how that beach management should occur. And one of the new components of this estuary adaptive management plan that we proposed, and it's been adopted in the biological opinion, is really looking at how we can enhance habitat conditions for salmon in the estuary, and looking at sort of the difference between when a natural breach would occur and what those conditions would be like and what the timing would be like compared to when we are making an action to minimize that flood risk. Broadly speaking, it's only usually a couple of days difference, but that does create conditions that could potentially impact salmon. And so our habitat enhancement efforts are intended to help address that. And Neil is going to share those.
Thank you. This is just a brief explanation of habitat enhancements that we'll be planning over the next few years. And as Jessica mentioned, they're to minimize the effects of breaching activities by implementing these habitat enhancement measures. So there's two types of proposed habitat enhancements. And the first is a wetland or littoral or epibenthic habitat, creating 3 to 5 acres within the estuary, not to exceed 6 acres. And these are specifically proposed in the 2025 biological opinion. The second type of proposed habitat enhancement are large woody debris structures or boulder clusters at 2 to 4 locations within the main stem, and these would perform a similar function as to structures in Dry Creek. They would provide hydraulic cover. They would provide escape cover for juvenile salmon, juvenile steelhead. Next. And so over the next 2 years, we'll be developing a feasibility study. And the feasibility study will leverage prior monitoring data that Jessica mentioned, prior monitoring data from the previous biological opinion, from the 2023 biological assessment, and tools and studies developed for the estuary. There's the habitat viewer. There is a habitat classification study that was done in 2017. So leveraging these studies and prior monitoring data to develop the feasibility for these habitat enhancements. Next. And so the feasibility projects or feasible projects will include short-term improvements with boulder clusters and floodplain improvements, but also long-term resilience to sea levels. So the feasibility will include estimates of sea level rise and how these potential enhancements perform under sea level rise. So just to go over the schedule for the feasibility study. So within 2 years, so these are within 2 years of the publication of the 2025 biological opinion. So it was published on April 29th, 2025. Between now and May 1st or May 31st, data collection, including biological data, cultural and hydrologic data to evaluate potential sites within the estuary, and then site evaluation and prioritization through August of 2026, and then conceptual design of the preferred site in early 2027, and then a draft and final feasibility report April 30th, 2027. So just over 2 years from the publication of the biological opinion. And so that work is ongoing right now. And then also within the biological opinion, within 5 years, we will complete design and permitting and obtain funding for the enhancements. And then within 8 years, by 2033 or thereabouts, construction complete for the enhancements, or as called out in the biological opinion. Alternatively, Sonoma Water can fund third-party actions within the estuary that provide a benefit. An example of this is enhancement of the Willow Creek marsh near the river mouth. And so just to give you an example of what some of these things might look like. So we would look to enhance littoral floodplain habitat and epibenthic habitat for food production. And so here is a cross-section of the estuary during open conditions and closed conditions, and the little red squares show habitat that we would want to emphasize. So emphasizing that contact between the water surface and that shoreline area, the littoral habitat. And next. And this is how it would look like in concept. So this is Penny Island, and this is a schematic of the different elevations of Penny Island. The red are higher elevations, the greens and blues are lower elevation, and you can see two excavated channels sort of on the upper side of that with forks, and so that is excavation to maximize that littoral habitat. So that's just a concept of what it might look like. That's not on any plans as of yet. So that's just a concept. And next, those are tidal channel connections, by the way. And then large woody debris structures. These would look a lot like the woody debris structures in Dry Creek. And there's two types pictured here. This is an apex wood jam. So it's at the apex of an island, again, performing that, similar functions, hydraulic cover, escape cover. And then there's another type of wood jam. So a lateral jam, so placed on the shoreline. And these are taken from the Garcia River, these pictures. And we actually took a tour, Sonoma Water staff and NIMS staff, to look at some of these enhancements in the Garcia River, I think in 2023. And then in concept, how this would look in the Russian River estuary. Next, so there's Penny Island with the tidal connections. And then these are just some potential structure locations, and the structures would look similar to those apex jams, those lateral jams. So it's several locations. And again, this is just a concept of where they could be located within the estuary. And as I said, that work is ongoing.
Thank you. We're available for questions.
Great. Thank you so much. Is there anyone online who has any questions? Claudia, Madeline, or Chris? Not seeing any hands raised. And how about in person?
Quick one. In terms of the large weight debris structures in that planning, do you ever see that being wrapped into the habitat, the acreage enhancement? The LWD structures are more targeted for adult salmonas, particularly Chinook salmon. So I'm curious what the plan is there. Is that going to be a separate process?
So through the feasibility study, we plan on incorporating that into the study itself. But we are looking at the large woody debris structures as potentially independent projects that could move forward separately once they are better defined and locations. So that concept site is just one of the many sites that are on our current sort of conceptual map of locations throughout the main portion of the estuary. But they wouldn't necessarily have to, because they could be potentially permitted separately in a different way. Don't necessarily have to follow the same schedule that we anticipate for larger habitat enhancements.
Yeah. No. Any questions from members of the public on this one? I just want to say that I'm really excited about the potential enhancements to the estuary. And I know that this is all conceptual, but at some point would love to get this out. And I was kind of like, well, is it the River MAC or is it the Coast MAC? But maybe we could even consider, some kind of a special meeting just to share this information with the community when it's appropriate. Because again, I feel like we're still at a very conceptual phase. The dates are further out, but would love to follow up on this one and try to get it to the folks who are, at some point going to be seeing this take place, out their backyards.
Yeah, I think that would be a great idea. And we'd love to get some input from folks too on what they'd like to see out there.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, thank you so much for the work and for sharing the information. Really appreciate it. I believe that was the penultimate presentation, and we have one more. Is that correct? All right, wonderful. And so up next is our Salmon and Steelhead Survival Studies work group.
Thank you, Greg again. I'm here with my colleague, Justin Smith. We've been participating in the Salmon and Steelhead Survival Studies work group, which was compelled by the 2025 biological opinion. The overarching goal of this work group is to characterize survival and the sources of mortality that are occurring as salmon and steelhead migrate downstream. This work group is led by Sonoma Water, but we're receiving input from multiple entities, some of the partners in this room today, as well as the California Department of Fish and Wildlife and researchers at UC Berkeley. Study element 1 really is focused on 2 species and kind of 2 different locations. So coho salmon, the question there really revolves around how fish are doing in the lower river. So from Dry Creek, including Dry Creek, down through the main stem and estuary as those fish are moving out to the ocean. And then steelhead in the upper river. So from the East Fork down to, say, the mouth of Dry Creek. A couple other study elements have to do with predatory fish, so their distribution, abundance, and what kinds of habitat those fish are occupying in the main stem of the Russian River. Justin will talk about these second 2 study elements, as well as the steelhead portion of study element 1. But I'm going to start out by talking about our work with coho salmon, coho salmon smolts. So we've been doing that work since 2021, even before the 2025 biological opinion was issued. And a big question, there are native and non-native fish species, as well as many bird species, mammal species that are known to predate on juvenile salmon. No question about it. But the question is, to what extent does Mirabel Dam operations or some of our flow management sort of exacerbate the predation issue? So we set out to try to get at that in the case of coho salmon, again, in the lower part of the river, using a tool known as acoustic telemetry. Justin's going to talk about radio telemetry, which is similar technology, but a little bit different. And our work really involves tagging fish in the hatchery, coho salmon smolts in the hatchery with these acoustic tags. And then we release those fish in Dry Creek just downstream of the hatchery. So again, these are hatchery fish that are tagged in the hatchery with these acoustic tags. And then those fish have to migrate, make their way down Dry Creek, downstream through the main stem of the Russian River and out through the estuary as smolts. And they're motivated to do this immediately when we release them. They're ready to go. So they don't really rear in Dry Creek or the Russian River estuary at all. So by placing these acoustic receivers that are listening for these acoustic tagged fish at strategic points along that migration corridor, we can estimate survival through sort of, pieces of that migration pathway. And what we found over the years is that survival in Dry Creek and the estuary is actually really good. Fish die when they move downstream, but having survivals of 0.89, 0.90, that's really good. That means 90% of those fish are making it through those segments of that migration pathway. But through the main stem of the Russian River, different story. Only about, less than half of those fish are making it through the main stem of the Russian River. So back to the question about the role of the dam and exacerbating predation, I think we still have a little ways to go to answer that question. But when we start thinking about the conditions that those fish have experienced or are experiencing as they're moving downstream, I think we can start to gain some insights. And I just want to orient you to this graph first. There's kind of a lot going on, but on the horizontal axis, we have river flow in the main stem, and then on the vertical axis, we have estimated survival. So each one of these dots, each one of these points represents one of those survival estimates from the years we've been doing this work. And what you see is that higher flow results in higher survival. But there's actually a little bit more to this story. The dam operations and flow releases are related to natural flow in the river. So when we have low flow, we're going to be more likely to raise the dam earlier, which would potentially impact smolts more than when we have high flows and we raise the dam later, which would result in less of an impact potentially on salmon and steelhead smolts. So you notice that the closed circles, again, this plot bears that out. Like we have conditions of low survival at low flows when the dam is up, and then higher survival at higher flows when the dam is down. But what we really don't have yet is survival at sort of these mid-range flows of 300 to 600 CFS in the main stem. So we feel like we kind of still have a kind of an incomplete picture of the role that flow is playing in survival. So we want to better define this in the future with potentially some flow releases that would be timed for some of our releases of acoustic tagged fish. So stay tuned for that in future years. And then I think that's all I had, and I'll turn it over to Justin to talk steelhead.
Good afternoon. My name is Justin Smith. I'm a senior environmental specialist with Sonoma Water. And I think I'll try to quickly answer a question that many of you might have, and that's why we're using radio telemetry instead of acoustic telemetry. For steelhead smolts, the run timing of steelhead is in the winter, and we're not able to safely operate acoustic receivers in the river or deploy them at winter high flows. So we're relying on radio telemetry in this case because the radio receivers can be operated at the top of the bank in the dry. Next slide, please. So our objectives are to estimate steelhead smolt survival and migration timing throughout the main stem Russian River at a variety of flows, and then relate those survivals to flow, temperature, and turbidity. 2025 was a pilot year for us. We tested methods. We radio tagged a group of 50 fish and held them at the hatchery for 7 days, and radio tagged a second group of fish, 10 fish, and held them for 46 days. We had no tag loss or tagging mortality in either of those groups. We operated 5 detection sites in the upper Russian River, and all of them functioned well at high winter flows. We had high tag retention, and the tag scars healed well. We had very high detection efficiency at all of our sites, which was really great. But we had slower immigration rates than were expected. So the fish took longer to travel through the main stem Russian River than we expected, which meant that we selected a tag that had too short of a battery life. The tag lasted 46 days in the case of our 2025 pilot study. So moving on to 2026, we're selecting a larger tag with a larger battery that has a 155-day tag life. We're gonna have a larger sample size, which will allow us to have two separate release groups. One that will release in February when the hatchery releases a large group of its smolts. And then a second release group that we can release opportunistically if a flow of 350 CFS occurs in the upper Russian River. And that would allow us to target two separate flows in 1 year. If that flow doesn't occur because it's a very wet winter, we'll release those fish in mid-March. And we're also adding two additional detection sites on the Russian River, one just upstream of Healdsburg at Alexander Valley Road, and a second one much farther downstream at Duncan's Mills. So that's kind of wrapping up the survival study aspect of these study elements. And we're going to move on to one source of mortality for these fish, which is from predatory fish. And I'll cover these next two study elements. So in order to look at predatory fish abundance and distribution, we're going to do snorkel surveys in the main stem Russian River and count large-bodied predatory fish. And then we're going to relate the predatory fish distribution to the physical habitat that's in the stream. And to characterize the physical habitat that's in the stream, we're going to rely on a consumer-grade fish finder that takes a waypoint with every depth sounding that it takes, and it allows us to quickly build topographic maps of the stream bottom under the water surface. Then we can use our fish observations to kind of develop the types of depths that these fish are using. And we can look at the fish habitat in the Wohler Pool, which is formed by the Mirabel Dam, when the dam is inflated, and compare it to the habitat that's there when the dam is deflated and it's a free-flowing river. And we can also compare the amount of predatory fish habitat that's in the Wohler Pool to reaches of the river that are outside of the Wohler Pool. So in summary, for study element 1, the coho salmon smolts, we have successfully collected survival estimates for several years now in the main stem Russian River and in Dry Creek. For steelhead smolts, we've successfully developed and evaluated our study methods. Our preliminary results show that migration is slower than expected, but that survival is similar to coho smolts. And then for study elements 2 and 3, we've successfully developed and evaluated methods and begun characterizing fish habitat in the main stem Russian River. And we just like to thank our partners as well.
Great. Are there any members of the public who have any questions about this presentation? Seeing no one rise, anyone online, any members of the committee? Not seeing any hands raised. And so with that, I will bring it back to those of us who are in person. Janet?
Just a quick question on the larger tags that you're going to be using. Will you also be using larger smolts?
No, we're actually going to be using smaller smolts than we used in 2025. So what we're trying to do is use a similar size smolt as what we capture in our downstream migrant traps so that they're representative of the wild population. We were really conservative with the tag burden, so we were trying to keep our tag really small to our fish in our first year. But since both our study went so well in 2025 and studies in other systems have used much larger tags relative to the size of the fish, we felt that it was safe to go with a larger tag in a smaller fish.
And there must be studies that have been done regarding the behavior of the fish with the larger tags?
Yeah, there are quite a few studies, and we will still be much more conservative than they were. So I don't think we're going to have a problem with tag effects on our fish.
Great, that's going to be a fun study.
Yeah, it's going to be really
watch.
interesting.
Any other questions? I really want to say thank you. And as much fun as it would be to participate in the pinniped count, I wonder if there's a sign up for some of those snorkeling surveys, because that sounds like a lovely way to spend the day in the Russian River. Thank you so much for the information. And thank you also, David, and the whole team for organizing this. I really hope that we can get back to an annual cadence. And I did want to share one other piece of information before the meeting draws to a close. Supervisor Gore was unable to be here today. He's the other board appointee to this body, but he and I are actually forming a Russian River ad hoc, watershed ad hoc, and that is not to create one more entity or acronym associated with the Russian River, but actually, and I understand that the Russian River watershed network is also starting this, actually do sort of a mapping of who is doing what. So that we can also start to think about how we, as the county and as Sonoma Water, can help institutionalize some of these frameworks. And that was why I was so excited to see that some of these frameworks are being institutionalized. So they will carry forward, going into the future. But I think one of the challenges that we're also busy working on our pieces. No one body has complete control over the Russian River watershed. And so if we want to see achieve that objectives that I think that we all want to, which is, swimmable, fishable, drinkable is the sort of 3-word way of summing it up. We need to work together. And so we need to be aware of what we're doing. And I think that's the beauty of this meeting. And so I'm really grateful for all of the work that went into putting on this meeting today and all the subject matter expertise that we hold in this room. So thank you all so much for the very informative presentations. David, is there anything else as the kind of informal MC that you would like to say before we wrap up?
Just a thank you to the resource agencies that we received guidance from the board. Director Hopkins, thank you for your support to allow us to continue to enjoy the flood control and water supply benefits of Lake Mendocino and Lake Sonoma. This work is a requirement for us to provide those services, the drinking water supply for over 600,000 people, all the benefits of having those in-stream flows in the Russian River for folks to recreate in, supports agriculture, it supports our community and our economy. And it's really vital to continue to have these flows and this resource meet the needs of the Endangered Species Act and our entire community. I'll say the same for our direct customers, our water contractors. They support through their rates a lot of the implementation of the biological opinion, as well as all property taxpayers in Sonoma County who are assessed a certain amount of property tax to help us manage Lake Sonoma and Warm Springs Dam in particular. So thanks to the entire community for supporting this work and for the great partnership with the resource agencies.
Thank you so much. And thanks to all of my fellow committee members. I feel like this picture is a fitting image to end it on, because I think it also acknowledges that the watershed and our marine ecosystems are, integrally intertwined. And so it's a beautiful image and way to end the meeting. And so with that, thank you all so much for being here. I do have one other piece of information. The webpage, sonomawater.org/PPFC, has BIOP information, and all of today's presentations will actually be posted there for anyone who missed the meeting. So with that, we are adjourned. Thank you so much.
Thank you.